Hey, everybody, Melissa Mackenzie, publisher of the American Spectator, here on the Spectacle podcast with Scott McKay, the awesome, the raging Cajun, the sad.
No, stop it. Stop it. You cannot do that.
Why can I not?
No, that's not it either. Okay, first of all, I'm wearing an LSU hat in recognition of LSU's baseball team, which is #1 in the country, 3-0, destroyed Western Michigan over the weekend, and is probably, as this podcast ends, is going to go out and beat Southern, which is the #1 team in black college baseball. So LSU. The Raging Cajuns are the University of Louisiana at Lafayette, which is 45 minutes away. Mm-hmm. That's ULL. They're the Raging Cajuns. LSU is the Tigers, so don't do that. Besides, we're trying to get away from James Carville, okay? And that Raging Cajun stuff, he can have that. I don't want it. I got nothing to do with the Raging Cajun thing. So just now that you're corrected, please go on.
You seem a little exercised, a little overly exercised about this.
Yeah, the Raging Cajun thing it's like it's new and it's fresh and it's not good. So we're gonna get away from the Raging Cajun thing.
Okay. Well, so we are joined by Scott McKay, the uptight Louisiana resident.
Oh, okay. All right.
I didn't know I was wading into this.
I never do these things to you, you know.
I didn't realize I was wading into these alligator-infested waters. I should have known. I am sorry. Also, LSU sucks, but that's another thing. I have to say it's obligatory.
In basketball, in men's basketball, they absolutely suck. But not in women's basketball, and not in football, and not in baseball.
Okay. All right. So
now it is a woke indoctrination factory these days. That I will give you. Of course, that's kind of every college. And it turns out, we're going to talk about this some more, it's the federal government big time, and it's going to get worse. But anyway, yeah.
Well, okay, so I since you brought it up, and since we're on the topic, we'll get to, just for people listening, we'll be talking about Biden's fall down the stairs. You know, he fell into Ukraine today, and well, I don't know, was it into Ukraine, or was it into Poland when he flew over to Poland? I'm not sure which now, because he was
I didn't see where he did it. Like the whole thing was a pratfall, though, right? Like, I mean, everything about this was idiotic. Like he's going to go to Kiev, but he won't go to East Palestine, where like the American people actually care about what's going on. So he goes to Ukraine, and he's going to go give a big sloppy hug to Zelensky, the dictator in a tracksuit, right? Mm-hmm. And you know, and promise, oh, here's another $500 million worth of stuff. We're going to pay your pensions. It's like, what? Like, wait, who voted for us to pay for Ukraine's pensions? You know, and meanwhile, it like finally they declare an emergency, and now the EPA is like, oh, we're going to take charge of East Palestine. It's been 3 weeks since this train derailed over there. You let the people breathe the air, drink the water, and do whatever for like 3 weeks, and now we're going to take charge, right? After they've been telling everybody that it's not a disaster. It took forever for Biden to even agree to give a disaster declaration for that part of Ohio.
I thought that he hadn't. I thought it was...
he finally did, I think.
I'm not sure about that.
And now the EPA is like, we're taking charge of the scene. And it's like, it takes y'all 3 weeks. Most of the damage is done by now. You know, but it's okay, because Biden's going to go to Ukraine, and he's going to promise those people the world, you know, in advance of the Russians sending in 500,000 troops. And it's like, okay, so you're now basically committing us to send troops in when the Russians go in? I mean, is that what this is going to be when the Russians start their offensive? Like, now we're going to have a hot war. Meanwhile, there's news reports that the Chinese are beginning to arm the Russians. Like the Chinese are selling them all of, you know, they're basically, I guess, trading them oil. Or the Russians are trading them oil for military hardware. I'm assuming the Chinese are going to sell the Russians frontline stuff to test it against the American stuff. So we're going to go from, arming the Ukrainians with our old things that beat the hell out of the Russians' new things. And now our old things are going to be up against Chinese new things, most of which are basically designed stolen from us. And we'll see what happens.
Given to them by the Clinton administration, the Obama administration. The other thing is that Putin made his nuclear arsenal active and has removed himself from the last treaty with us, which he wasn't really keeping anyway, but and they have 4,000 warheads. They have more warheads than we do, by the way, because like idiots, we abided by the treaty and got rid of stuff. And so, so for those who think that we are the biggest nuclear armed country in the world, that is not true. Russia has more nuclear warheads than we do. Now, whether they're operational or not is a question, but they have more, and they are now activating them, which hasn't happened, I think, since the Cold War. And so here we are I feel like I'm watching Barney Fife roll us into World War III. That's what this feels like to me. Like, it's just a bumbling, rambling thing. Zelensky has this administration and, the Republicans and Democrats by the short hairs because of information he has on them and probably all the money they've laundered through there. And here's the thing that I'm still so angry about with regard to this whole thing. This did not have to happen. This was not inevitable. A strong President Biden or president would not have created a door opening for someone like Putin. But Putin saw weakness and sees the opportunity. And so, yes, Putin is evil, but so you don't give a guy like that an opening. But our administration did. And so, it's just as infuriating. If this goes into into World War III, which it's kind of slowly rolling into, this will be the dumbest war in the history of wars in the world of wars. It's just so asinine. It's insane. And
the thing that blows me away about this is, okay, so it's a year, right? I guess February 20th, we're recording this on the 21st. So I guess it was February 22nd of 2022 when the Russians went in. So I guess by the time you guys see this podcast, it'll be a year. And the first wave of the Russian attack really kind of got ground into dust. I mean, they weren't successful. They took some pieces of Ukraine, but at a enormous cost. They realized that the logistical capabilities of the Russian army were much worse than they knew, and they knew they weren't good. And so, we spent an inordinate amount of money on the Ukrainians, but we gave them a lot of our old stuff that is not top of the line, that if we ever got in a hot war would be stuff that we would use in reserve. And of course, now we don't really have the reserve hardware because we've given it to the Ukrainians and we're not getting it back. And this is after $85 billion worth of hardware that went missing, not really missing, but was lost in Afghanistan. So, you're really talking about an enormous amount of war materiel that we don't have anymore. But what we spent in Ukraine did a really good job of grinding up Russia's army. All right. So had we made peace, had we brokered something, probably giving Russia some of the Donbass, probably giving them, you know, a bridge to Crimea, right? Neither of which are really in America's national interest to preserve for Ukraine. Like, doesn't matter to us. And the people that live in those areas are mostly Russian. You can make the argument that, well, yeah, but they're traditionally part of Ukraine and they're mostly Russian only because the Soviets basically moved Russians in. And like, okay, yeah, I get all of that. All right. But they were mostly Russian when Ukraine became a country again. And most of those people probably would rather be Russian than Ukrainian. Okay. If you had a plebiscite, that's probably how it would go. And frankly, that is what should have been done is, you know, look, we're going to demilitarize this place. We're going to send NATO troops in or whatever, and we're going to have a plebiscite. And whichever way the people go, and I'm sure that election would be dirty as hell, but it is what it is. Okay. You know, that's it. We're going to do it. And whoever, and then that's the end of the war. Okay. And, you know, that way our national interest is served, because what we get out of it is we go to the Europeans and we say, we're going to be the ones that sell you natural gas and not the Russians, because that's their punishment for this, is they got to sell their stuff to China and India. And that way we eventually make back all the money we spent propping up Ukraine. The Europeans get to invest in Ukraine under some semblance of the knowledge that, okay, they're not going to be part of NATO, but maybe the Ukrainians go do a bunch of bilateral deals to get some sort of protection, or they just engage in a trade relationship with the Europeans, and that trade relationship is going to involve some sort of security guarantees, because if the Germans invest heavily in Ukraine, it means the Russians can't invade Ukraine, because then they're trampling on German stuff, right? Like, those are the kinds of things that could have been done. Now, can you get Putin to the peace table? Well, if he can walk away with some of Ukraine, then maybe so. But we did nothing. We did nothing.
Well, I think we did worse. No, I think we did worse than nothing. By all accounts, we scuttled, actual peace deals that was.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and at least that's what the Israelis said, is there was a deal, and NATO and the US essentially scuttled the deal. But I mean, the whole point was, it's like, okay, maybe the deal was too early and we wanted to bleed Putin a little bit more. But once you got to the winner, make peace. I mean, what the hell? It's like, there's no, like, what is the difference in America's national security, global prestige, whatever, if you make peace right now with the Ukrainians giving away a little slice of the Donbass and like some land bridge to Crimea, which we're not going to allow that war to go on so that the Ukrainians can retake Crimea. That's not going to happen. When the Russians took Crimea, basically we've let them have it. And that was in what, 2014? Okay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
8-9 years ago. We're not going to say, oh no, you have to give back Crimea or else the war keeps. We're not going to do that. All right. So that doesn't even matter. They want a land bridge to it, which is a tiny little piece of land, and some of the Donbass. It is of no major interest to the United States if the Russians get that or not. It doesn't matter to us. Now, it might matter to the Ukrainians a lot, but here's the thing. Okay, Ukraine is America's puppet. They're our proxy in this. All right. So the real question is, this is what it really comes down to. Are you willing to make peace with the Russians now, having basically won your proxy war with the Russians, because their military has been ground up to the point where they can't really do this to anybody else? That's on one side of the fence. The other side of the fence is, do you continue this and escalate it so that essentially what you're now doing is you're sending in your troops, and Russia then becomes China's proxy, and you're in a proxy war with the Chinese? The last time we've been in proxy wars with the Chinese basically twice. Vietnam, and Korea. And neither one of them worked out too well because the Chinese can keep throwing troops in forever. All right.
Right.
And we fought the actual Chinese in Korea. We didn't even fight the Chinese in Vietnam. It's just that the Chinese and the Russians kept giving the North Vietnamese stuff. Okay. And, when the other side's got lots and lots of people and you don't have that many to put in, I mean, the way you win is your stuff is better and you have more of it. But the problem is that when you get in a proxy war with China now and the manufacturing capability that they have, all of this is bad. They're over what? Like, what's the difference? Like, over a slice of the Donbass? Who cares? I mean, really, who cares? And you've let this thing go on to such a level. And then, there's the whole business of blowing up that pipeline in the Baltic Sea and everything else that, you've escalated this to the point where you might not be able to make peace now. And if I'm Putin, I'm not going to make peace because I got 300,000 fresh troops I'm getting ready to send in. When those guys all get killed, maybe I'll make peace, but.
I have a bigger global issue with all of this. So China has been kind of sitting on the sidelines right now, kind of watching and waiting. Who do they have a better chance of making money from? And who do they have a better outcome with? And so far, they've been dealing with us because they're, the loss of manufacturing in China and everything. If America pulled everything out and if we stopped trading with them, it would be an absolute disaster. The Chinese people would starve and then they have a humanity. But what does China gain with Russia? What they gain with Russia is not only money, but if they win Ukraine, they gain a breadbasket.
Well, Russia can feed China too.
Well, exactly.
Russians have a lot of farmland.
Right. But
they,
Ukraine has
they
more.
Have a lot of agricultural.
So you have that, but
is it more or is it just, an additional amount?
No, I'm pretty sure it's more. Yeah. That's the Ukraine's biggest, the biggest thing that they have going for them is basically their trade with grains. And that's one of the problems.
Ukraine is a breadbasket. There's no doubt about that.
So, my point being is right now, China is in trouble as it is. They have had trouble after their zero COVID policy has been just absolutely destructive. They've already got a bunch of people who are malnourished in China. They don't have enough jobs for them. Their real estate economy is completely imploding. Things are not good for China. That makes them dangerous because they're willing to try things that they might not necessarily do because she knows what happens when the Chinese people revolt. It's not pretty because they have a lot of people. The other thing is they have a lot of people and they have a lot of men, military age, with nothing to do with them.
Yep.
And they also share a border with Russia. So and I don't think our current administration or anybody is considering the fact how easy it would be for China to help Russia with not only technology, but manpower, and why it might be advantageous for them to do so.
Yeah.
And so it's like, what are you thinking? They don't have to be super smart in China. Their tech doesn't even have to be good. They have bodies to burn. And Russia has learned that, Putin has been probably very dismayed to learn that his troops and his equipment are not up to snuff. But he's sitting on a pile of gold, and that can buy you a lot.
Well, that's just it. If he's willing to turn his country into an economic colony of China, which probably is, they'd be better off than what they've been, right? There's a lot that Chinese can do, right? They've got the population, they can bring troops to the table. China is basically building a global empire. You go look at what the Chinese are doing in Africa now. the people that China can mobilize from Africa if the thing really becomes a world war. It's not a good idea if you get in a situation where it's the Russians and the Chinese getting together and we're on the opposite side of a global conflict. I mean, the old line is don't ever get in a land war in Asia, right? Well, if the Russians and the Chinese are allies, then the land war is in Eurasia, not Asia, because if the Chinese will send people in on the Russian side, and I think most of this is like, you really don't even want to contemplate it all.
Okay, so Scott, my question is, with all of this, we're thinking about these dire possibilities. Why isn't our government thinking about it on the right or the left? Is it a failure of imagination? Do they just think it's unfathomable that something like what we're describing could happen? I mean, we really are not giving Putin many choices in this kind of war. And he has nuclear power. And if the Chinese help him, he has bodies and technology that Ukraine won't have, because they will have old Western equipment.
Until they get top of the line Western equipment, but then again, you're going to need top of the line Western troops because the Ukrainians are out of that.
And who's manufacturing this stuff? I mean, a lot of the things that we have manufactured are manufactured in China.
I know.
So are we going to fire Detroit back up and all of the defunct, assembly lines that we have and make bullets and bombs again? Is that what's going to happen?
Probably. I mean, if you get into a world war, that's what you're going to have to do. And you're right back to the 1940s all over again. But I mean, again, like what's the percentage here? Like, what do we get out of this? I mean, like, what are we really trying to get? Are we trying to, we're going to bring Ukraine into NATO? And how does that make NATO better? Ukraine's the most corrupt country in Europe. It's the breadbasket of the whole continent. And yet it's one of the poorest countries there. I mean, it's like nothing.
But still richer than Russia.
Well,
I mean, it's still better off than Russia. One of the things that's been surprising to the Russian troops is coming in. They've heard all these bad things about Ukraine. They come in here and they're like, wait a minute.
It's nicer than back home.
It's nicer than back home.
At least it was before they blew the place up.
Right.
So it's like, what are we getting out of this? And the thing that, I mean, I've seen this over and over again, and I think it's probably true. I mean, the thing that's obvious is the interest that we have here is not a national interest, it's a personal interest, right? I mean, the Bidens got bribed by the Ukrainians, right? I mean, like that's what this is.
Does that explain why everybody in Washington, left and right, is for this thing?
Well, okay, so Ukraine's been on money laundry for a lot of people for a long time. So I'm sure you go look at the Lindsey Grahams of the world and people like that, and they have their grubby little fingers in some of these pots. Humanitarian aid that goes through contractors who have offices on K Street, right? Like, I mean, we all know about that, okay? It's one of the reasons that I think Trump got impeached was that he wanted to go dig around in there and see what was going on. And of course, all of the old hands that were involved in Ukraine policy, the Vindmans and the Victoria Newlands and, those kind of people, they're the ones that were desperate to see Trump get impeached over a phone call to investigate a crime.
Right.
It's ultimately what that first Trump impeachment was. He made a phone call like, hey, could you guys help us investigate criminal behavior by our people, not your people, our people.
And our people, let's be clear, are Mitt Romney has a person, John Kerry, John McCain,
and the Bidens,
Pelosi's kid. Yeah. I mean, the number of DC elite, offspring friends, advisors to
Look, there are more than a handful of countries where this is true, just like it is with the Ukraine. And this is a scam that has been run out of DC for a very long time with this foreign aid. And it's basically free money for the politically connected to get contracts to go deliver humanitarian aid to these other countries. And one of the things Trump did was like, okay, I'll give the Ukrainians military hardware. I'm going to call up Raytheon or whatever, and I was like, hey, go send these rockets to the Ukrainians. And everybody's like, wait, no, you can't do that. It's supposed to go through these cutouts so that we can all get our peace. And he's like, yeah, it's a waste of money. I'm not doing it. It was like, oh, well, now we're going to impeach you over Ukraine. Right. So like, I hate to say it, but I think that is what's driving this. Not because I've heard all the arguments about how important it is to democracy. That it's like, wait a minute, this guy has basically persecuted the Orthodox Church in Ukraine. He's persecuted, like he's not even letting them have services unless they're friendly to the government. He's shut down all opposition media in the country. I mean, he's
Zelensky we're talking about.
Yes. He's a dictator in a tracksuit is what this guy is. And, but that's democracy. And it's like, no. Okay. I mean, from the standpoint of how the place is structured, at least now, there's no moral superiority between the Ukrainian government and the Russian government. I mean, certainly the Ukrainian people, I think, have a better moral claim than the Russians do. I'm not arguing that.
No, they're defending their own land and they've been invaded.
That's what I'm saying. I mean, they got invaded. It's their stuff getting blown up. So obviously, I feel for the Ukraine. I guarantee you the average Ukrainian will look at Zelensky's government like, this guy's not much better than Putin. Okay. And they know how corrupt their government is, and who all of these between the Europeans and the Americans, all of the political elite that's mixed up in basically stealing money that was supposed to go to help the Ukrainian people. Like, they know all this stuff. They accepted it 30 years ago, like that this is the way of the world. But now, like they're the pawns of this, this idiotic battle between Putin on one side and the John Kerrys and Joe Bidens of the world on the other. And it's like, you can tell, I mean, there's a bunch of Ukrainians that are hanging in there and fighting for their country, but they've had millions of Ukrainians pick up and leave. Okay, millions. And that's an indication, that, I mean, it's not that they're not patriotic people or whatever, but they're like, I'm not going to stay here and die for Zelensky. Right. The hell with that. Let's get out of here.
Well, okay. So this is my pet theory, that all of this corruption existed, that the, Zelensky going around and destroying all the evidence. Hopefully he still has copies of it. So this is why the United States was so eager to make sure this was all cleaned up. But now Zelensky has the Biden administration and Western elites who he knows all the dirt on because of what's been funneled through Ukraine. And, things like the Sam Bankman-Fried type deal where there's money going to Ukraine, and then it comes back around to people, Democrats in the tune of millions. It's just a big money laundering thing. So you have that, and you have that sort of motivation to make sure that is kind of cleaned up. And you have the military industrial complex as per usual. People will say that there have been a couple hit pieces written about me, Scott, by certain neocons, basically saying that I'm morally obtuse because I'm not seeing that the defense of Ukraine as a noble effort for defending people's right to self-determination. Yes, we have helped defend these people, but ultimately what we're doing now is destroying their country. There's not going to be anything left. at the rate that Putin is going. And so
Right.
what exactly are we preserving for these people? It's going to be a pile of rubble. I mean, it's Aleppo, in Syria, where it's just
Right. I mean,
completely decimated.
So what do we do? We're going to have a Stalingrad? I mean, is that really? I mean, look, if Putin had the means, okay, and the will, that he wasn't going to stop until he got to the English Channel, all right, then I could understand saying, okay, well, let's grind this guy to dust in Ukraine, and if there's not a blade of grass left standing in Ukraine, so be it, right? But this, at the end of the day, is really a border conflict, right? Putin is trying to get as much of Ukraine as he can get, but
Did you hear his speech today? So he gave a speech talking about how Western values are terrible, how it's never going to be Russian values, how they are emphasizing in Hollywood, they're trying to make pedophilia okay, the destruction of families, like using basically conservative talking points,
right,
about Western culture. And all I could think of is that the devil himself appears to be an angel of light, So like Putin is not a good guy. I don't think he believes anything what he says, but I do know that he knows what certain people in America want to hear. And also, it doesn't mean that what he's saying is wrong. So it does seem to me, sometimes I feel like, are we fighting for the right for Zelensky to wear leather pants and high heels and gyrate around? Is that what that we're defending here with all these high and mighty moral values? It's just, and this takes us into the next thing, on the very same day that Putin's giving this speech indicting the West for their, immorality and basic scumbaggery, we have the Biden administration talking about DEI,
right,
and in using the whole federal government as a means to make intractable and impossible to root out this utterly divisive, completely baloney ideology. It's a new religion. And the minister of this is none other than Susan Rice.
Yeah.
And
right. Well, and there's kind of a connecting piece between Putin's speech and this Biden executive order that makes Susan Rice the DEI czar for the federal government. And that's Anchorage. If you remember, right after Biden took office, the Chinese foreign minister goes to Anchorage and sits down with Anthony Blinken and proceeds to berate him using Black Lives Matter rhetoric for like a half an hour nonstop about how America's a terrible country and all this kind of stuff. And the Chinese are running around talking about, America should stop slaughtering Black Americans.
China, by the way, is the most racist country against Black people, I think, in the world.
I mean, they're the most racist against everybody who's not Han Chinese. I mean,
exactly. Right.
I think maybe Koreans might be a little bit more racist than Chinese, but not by much.
I don't know.
And you just don't, I mean, like, you compare that culture to our culture, and like literally we're the least racist country in the world, which is right. It makes your blood boil over this idea of, okay, like people of different races, no matter in what situation you put them in, tend not to get along perfectly, right? There's gonna be friction here and there. That's human experience. We get that. We do more in America to try to paper that over or grease those wheels than anyone in world history has ever done.
Right.
And yet it's never good enough for Democrats who see advantage in it. And so now they're going to try to weaponize the entire federal government against not just white people, but just normal folks who are tired of talking and thinking about race and sex and, things that are biblically sanctioned put it that way. Like anybody who wants to hew to more of a traditional moral line is a bigot. And of course now, and it's like, okay, I get that Putin's given that speech, all right, but now you're pro-Putin if you're a traditional Christian, is how this is going to end up playing out, all right? And I mean, they've called you pro-Putin if you didn't want to go to World War III over freaking Ukraine. And now the cultural piece is going to get thrown in there, which, thanks a lot, Vlad.
Well, he knows what he's doing. He knows,
he knows what he's doing.
It's divisive.
And like you said, he's not wrong. Okay. I mean, like the guy is, I mean, if I'm trying to rally the Russian people, that's exactly what I would do.
Sure.
Look what happened in Afghanistan in 2021, right? We've talked about this. We go spend Pride Month flying the rainbow flag over the US Embassy in Kabul, and 6 weeks later, the freaking country goes to the Taliban. And why? Because the Afghans looked at that rainbow flag and said, I'd rather be run by the Taliban than these degenerate Americans. Who want to take our kids trans. And of course, it's kind of
they have a problem with child rape over there.
Yeah, it's like you guys really don't have a big moral case to make, being as though you spend all your time having sex with the little boys over there. But the point is, like, you don't make a political cause out of it. If you're the Afghans, you're kind of a little ashamed of that, right? We go fly the flag at the embassy and they're like, these guys are gross. And that was the end of that. Okay. So Putin looks at things as, well, okay, the way that you beat America from a rhetorical and moral standpoint is you just talk about how it's a degenerate country full of, gay people and trans people, and everybody's a racist. I mean, in other words, you just basically spit the Democrats' line back at them, and half of America is like, he's right. Like, I don't want Vladimir Putin to be right, but he's right about this. And so, the way I look at it is, it'd be really nice if we had our house in order. But the people who want to fight World War III now are the same people who have let our culture become something that, frankly, isn't worth fighting a world war for. Okay. I mean, like, that's the bad thing.
Not to you and I. There's plenty of people who seem to be happy about it. But the thing is that, you know what this reminds me of?
Wait, before you do that, let me make this quick point, because otherwise I'll forget it, and it's too damn good for me to forget. Military recruitment is down, right? People don't want to fight for the government that is going to put Susan Rice in charge of DEI and puts Sam Brinton in charge of the nuclear waste stockpile and puts freaking Rachel Levine in charge of, like, DHHS, right? People don't want to, the woke military, people don't want to fight for that, all right? And what we're seeing is that nobody leaves Antifa to go join the U.S. Marines.
Right. Well, that was going to be my point, Scott. I was going to, that's okay. So, like, in churches, we've had these churches, divide ideologically, and the people who are left behind are the woke folks, but the woke don't tithe, and the woke don't take care of the church, and the woke don't sing in the choir, and they don't really attend very often. So you have these empty sepulchers across the country, and then the true believers leave and have to, like, rebuild or start something new or whatever. It's the same type of thing which what's happening in our military. So you have, it's not the woke who want to go in the military. No, they're either on Skid Row in LA joining Antifa, or in Portland or Seattle or whatever, or they're trust fund kids doped out and nothing to do, and they're the shock troops for the Democrats, or they're basically layabouts. These are not people who are going to be going into the military to fight for their own right to wear a dress and high heels and makeup on TikTok. No. So who does that? It is the God-fearing patriotic young men of the Midwest and the South who do that. Right. And those are the people who defend the values that all of the leftists take absolutely for granted. And so who they, and they put their little Ukraine flag in their Twitter bio and think they've done something great, but we'll never do something to fight in defense of our country. In fact, the young people are the least patriotic of all generations because they've been told that America is bad and terrible and not worth defending or fighting for. And so
that's the point, right? Like, I mean, you're trashing the American culture that created a superpower.
Right.
You're not even trashing it. You've trashed it. Like, it's at this point, we have to rebuild it.
Right.
But, you're still enjoying the trappings of being a superpower. And so it's, we have to defend Ukraine no matter what. And it's like, no matter what, I mean, it's been known for a while, we're going to lose the next war we fight. Right? Because we don't we're not the kind of country that wins wars. Like, we have to have a massive national turnaround if this is going to happen. And
well, you've got two problems. You've got the people on the left who don't think there's anything worth fighting for because they just don't believe in the American idea and never have. And then on the right, you have people like me who are like, over my dead body should these young people who are willing to go into the military. My son's got 3 friends, at different military schools right now. And I can tell you right here, right now, America does not deserve them. These boys could have gone to a really great either state or Ivy League university type of education, and they are instead choosing, these are the Eagle Scouts choosing to enter the military, and America right now does not deserve them. And then they're tormenting them when they get into the military, feeding their heads with woke bullcrap, and hamstringing them when it comes to what it actually means to defend the country. It's a lose-lose proposition. And so all these vast military families are going, no, I don't want to send my boy into that. Well, you're gutting what it makes. And so now they're having to recruit complete morons. And we know what happens when you do that. Vietnam, they did that in Vietnam, and it was disastrous. Right. And I'm not talking just about the draft. I'm talking about allowing people who really were not qualified to fight, and it caused more problems for our own side. And so here we are in the situation of the left's making, and our country, we are not. And so now we're the country that lets white balloons fly over, or we shoot down or use 2 $400,000 missiles to shoot down a $17 weather balloon. I mean, and we look like idiots. Right. And so
that kind of stuff is provocative.
Right. It's provocative.
The United States, and you look at the Chinese spy balloon that flies across the ocean, and then the Northern Illinois bottle cap balloon brigade's balloon gets splashed in a lake in the Yukon, with a $500,000 missile, and you're like, oh my God, this is so much easier than we ever thought it was. I mean, if you're Boko Haram, or if you're, one of these other, you're like, the gates open, boys, let's go do what we want. And it's a terribly horrible thing. And the thing of it is that for 50 years, this wasn't a problem. I mean, we had bad American presidents that managed to hold things together to some extent. I mean, Jimmy Carter is in hospice now, and, we all, we thought Jimmy Carter was the worst ever, and certainly Desert One was a disaster and all this kind of stuff. But he didn't lose the Cold War in the 4 years he was in office. And they had begun to rebuild the military a little by the end of Carter's time in office. Reagan gets most of the credit for that, as he should. But, they had begun recovering a little from Vietnam when Carter was there. So it wasn't a total unmitigated disaster when he was there. This is a total unmitigated disaster.
But the thing that drives me crazy is we have Republicans who don't seem to realize it. It's one thing, at least there's just there's no talking sense on the right either. And so this is what I am just not. And I'd like to bring something else up just for a second that's kind of tangentially related to this. Is we had a lot of people who were never Trump, right? Mm-hmm. And they populate places like the Dispatch and Bulwark and whatever. But now these same people are trashing Ron DeSantis. And I'm like, this is not. So on the right, we have people who are, what are they? Just anti-Republican now? Yes. Or anti-American? Because, I mean, I won't mention the name, but she's been a friend of mine in the past, talking positively about Biden and negatively about Ron DeSantis. I can't even take you seriously.
No, well, you shouldn't. I mean, those are people who, ultimately what that comes down to, those are people who have refused to admit that they're wrong. Right? I mean, like, in a sort of a sports fan analogy, right? They didn't like the new coach that got hired, so they want the team to lose.
Right.
Right. That's what these people are. And at the end of the day, I mean, this is, it's a neocon thing. When you objectively look at the things that you believed and you realize that they were disastrous and you refuse to accept the evidence and say, okay, look, I mean, everybody's fallible. I was wrong. Right.
Right.
When you refuse to do that and you keep doubling down on a failed philosophical agenda, ideological agenda, that's when you become a Bill Kristol or a David French, or there's a whole bunch of other people that you could name. That's when you become these guys. And look, I mean, I'll fess up to it. There was a time when I agreed with a lot of the neocon stuff. Right? I mean, what blew me away was that we had absolutely no plan on how to run Iraq or Afghanistan after we invaded the place, both of those places, and then didn't get out, was when I started look like, what are we doing here? But, I mean, I was okay with the arguments to go in Afghanistan. I was okay with the arguments to go in Iraq. To me, I never really did understand why a punitive exposition is such a bad idea. Like, you go in there, you break everything, you kill as many people as you need to, and then you get the hell out of there. I never understood the idea that, oh no, we're going to rebuild this place and turn it into South Korea. And it's like, do you have any idea how long it took to turn South Korea into South Korea? I mean, we went in, that was like 1950 was when that war broke out, and it was 1978 or 9 before they had the first national election in South Korea. This is a military dictatorship for like almost 30 years because they had the North Koreans right next. I mean, it took forever to build up enough civil society and individual prosperity and those kinds of things that you could turn that place over and make it a democracy.
But there was never a commitment or a explanation to the American people that was happening and going to happen in the Mideast. And in fact,
they had no tradition of it happening.
No, exactly. I mean,
and you had something of a tradition in Japan, right? Which is why, and in Germany, is why those work. You didn't really have it in Korea, and so it took basically 30 years of an American puppet military dictatorship in South Korea before all of a sudden you had the institutions in place that when you flip the switch and turn the place into democracy, that, I mean, they beat each other up on the floor of the legislature. But other than that, it functions fairly well.
I kind of don't mind that, bring back the swords.
There are some people in Congress I'd love to see take a beat down on the House floor. I'm like, believe me, I'd be perfectly good with that. But I mean, the point is like, all of that was always unreasonable. It was unrealistic to I mean, you were never going to do that in Afghanistan. That was never going to happen. Okay. Those people are not capable of having a democracy. Okay. They don't have a civil
Well,
society in Afghanistan.
right.
The
Yeah.
best you're going to get is a king who's a benevolent dictator. That's the best you're ever going to get. And so if you were going to do Afghanistan, where was the king, right? Like, where was our friendly Saddam Hussein in Iraq? And they sat there, oh, well, we're not going to do that. And if you remember, Bush gives that awful second inaugural speech about how, oh, we're going to go, balls to the wall for democracy everywhere in the world, because that's what these people all want. And it's like, what? And they're like, you still have these guys who, like, this is still their little political religion is, oh, no, all of that's right. And we need to keep going. It's like, no, the treasury is empty. We're bankrupt.
Well, the crazy thing is that these are the same people who would say that, well, there's kind of the schizophrenia, certainly on the left. These people will talk about cultural appropriation and, cultural imposing your values.
Right.
And they're the most provincial people you've ever met, as if the people of Kabul in Afghanistan are going to have the same values as a Brooklynite. I mean, hell's bells, people in Texas don't have the same values as the people in Brooklyn.
And people in Brooklyn think people in Texas are just like people in Afghanistan.
Right, which is why anyone on the right is now considered a domestic terrorist. Why the Catholic people, evidently, if you go to a Latin mass, you are a potential terrorist. I mean,
right.
and the government is serious about this, how they view their own people.
Right.
And so the same people, so they want to impose their values not only across the country, but across the world. They think that they are more enlightened and they know better.
Right. And of course, it's a dog's breakfast of different things. It's totally ridiculous, right? Putting on a sombrero for Cinco de Mayo that's cultural appropriation, and it makes you a bad person. But flying the rainbow flag at the embassy in Kabul is peachy keen, and it's like, there's no sense in any of what you guys say. It's all crap, right? Like, you're just making it up as you go along. And really what it is to put upon normal people and keep us all on our toes. Because it's designed to make you subservient and compliant and unthinking. So when they tell you, oh, you don't need to put a mask. Well, wait, no, you do need to put a mask on. You put the mask on because you do what you're told.
Here's a great example of something I just read yesterday. So there was an article in The Economist talking about that Venice, evidently the canals are dry. Now, literally last year, I was watching this video about how we really have to enjoy Venice now because it's going to be flooded. The water is going to overtake the city and it's going to be uninhabitable. We've got about 20 years left. Literally, this was a kind of, and I even said to my son, I was like, maybe we should consider, making a trip to Italy to at least see this. It's pretty much a natural wonder of the world, and it's kind of cool, before this is all gone. And this year, there's no water in the canals. Yeah. I'm like, what? But again, it's the same type of thing.
Sea levels have not actually risen.
Right.
Like, they've not risen. Like, it's been whatever, just 10, 11 years. And there's no sea level rise. In fact, there's no global rise in temperature for more than 100 months. There's none. And they say, well, but it's a pause, and the pause will stop. And when that happens, you get the hockey stick, and it's like, yeah, but that's not what you said when you started this. You gave us the hockey stick back in 2001, and none of your predictions have come true. there's an explanation every time, like, you know, oh, well, but look, it's, you know, flooded in Miami. And it's like, yeah, that's not sea level rise, that's tides.
Right.
And it's also the land sinks because you put 50-story buildings on it.
Right. On a beach,
sand,
essentially.
right? So, I mean, you know, so like this is an issue that, you know, to requires some civil engineering, but it's not a global warming issue. And they, you know, they've gotten to the point where, you know, earthquakes are now global warming. And it's like, guys,
right.
You know, when you got to try this hard, ultimately it means you're full of shit. Like, ultimately, you're full of shit. And they are. And everybody, I think, realizes that. And, you know, when they brought out Greta Thunberg, right, and who is now a pro-trans advocate, because of course,
big surprise.
Of course she is. And it's like, oh, right, okay. There's like a really funny Babylon Bee video. I think it's actually from a couple of years ago, but I like ran across it on YouTube over the weekend. And it's, you know, the master class things where they get all these different people who's going to teach a master class over the internet. And they're like, yeah, we've fired all our master class instructors and we just hired Greta Thunberg because she's doing all of it now. And it's like, coal mining, you know, Greta Thunberg teaches you coal mining. How dare you? And it's like, it's so funny, like just typical Babylon Bee stuff. But like they brought her out, right? And we've talked about her before, but she's such a perfect avatar for this, you know, climate change advocacy crap, that which is another one of the sacraments of this woke religion. You know, is you've got your lifestyle has to go down the tubes to save the planet, and the planet barely knows we're there. I mean, that's like that's the thing is, you know, you go and you look at the, you know, like these earthquakes that keep happening in Turkey. I think this morning there was another 6.4.
Was there?
Which like isn't even all that big an earthquake in Turkey anymore. Like if it's not 7.8, then, you know, they don't even care, because, you know, anything that a 6.4 would shake down has probably already been taken down. And, you know, but like that has nothing to do with the climate. It has nothing to do with people, right? It's just, that's the earth, which is bigger than us and couldn't care less about us. And, you know, will do whatever. And, you know, they're like children, these people that think, oh, well, you know, you flying across the country, or you having an SUV, or you eating meat is, you know, that's unsustainable. And it's like, how is it unsustainable? We've been doing this for 5,000 years with the eating meat. Like, what are you even talking about? By the way, having all those cows and they poo, that's fertilizer that feeds plants, that makes the planet greener.
Did you see Al Gore over in the World Economic Forum? I think he was like nearly
unhinged lunatic.
He's completely unhinged.
The guy needs to be committed to a mental institution. He's nuts. He's nuts. Bill Gates is nuts. I mean, we're governed by people who are literally off their freaking rocker. I mean, Joe Biden is non-compos mentis. All right. Kamala Harris, I mean, it's nothing. There's nothing there. That's an empty head. Okay. I mean, like she got where she got, you know, like
laterally,
different orifice than the one we hear her talk out of.
Yeah.
Was the operative thing with Kamala Harris. And I mean, like, you just look across the board at the people who have power in this country, and they're not right in the head. And the things that they want are things that 20 years ago, before the whole country kind of went mad, were evidence of mental illness. Okay. I mean, like people would say, no, you can't, that's crazy. You can't have that. And now it's, you know, the people that want to defend the norms of 20 years ago, they say are crazy. And then you want to ask the American people to sacrifice for this regime, right? Whether it's let your standard of living go to hell, or give up your free speech, send your kids to fight in the military against the Russians in Ukraine, or the Chinese in Taiwan, or whatever. And like, I don't know how you're going to get, I mean, maybe you can harvest enough ballots to win elections and get somebody like a John Fetterman elected. Okay, maybe you can do that. I mean, obviously, in some places you can. We're seeing that, but I can tell you, you're not going to hold the country together like that. Ultimately,
well, I mean, that I don't think
they won't do it.
I don't think they care about that. So, okay. So I have a bone to pick with you.
All right.
All right. So our readers need to hear about this. So you wrote a piece that got us banned on Twitter, on Facebook.
I know.
And everywhere else.
And it's on this topic too.
And it's on this topic. So you talked about transgenderism being crazy.
Mental illness.
Mental illness. Right.
Which I am correct.
Yes.
It's still listed as a mental illness. It's still listed as one. And yet, if you say this on Twitter that Elon Musk owns now, if you say this, Twitter will ban you.
So 3,000, they have 3,000 employees or, roundabout, and which is a fraction of what they had before, but it's still enough for us we appealed that. It went through the appeals process and they still said we had to take down the tweet that just merely linked to your article.
Right.
And the issue that I have with this is that when it comes to free speech, it doesn't mean that you agree with what is said and then all the agreeable things get to be put out there. Right. No, it means that free speech, Elon, Mr. South African, I'll give you an American education on free speech. Of course, the people here in the United States don't know what it is either. But that means freedom for people to disagree with you. So like there's going to be lots of times people say crazy stuff that you disagree with that may or may not be right or wrong. I mean, in this case, you're right. But
Thank you.
You're I mean,
you were wavering a little bit there.
Well, I'm not wavering a little bit. I'm just saying that, like, as far as, free speech goes, people need to understand that free speech means nothing if you all agree about everything.
Let me tell you about Facebook. Okay. So, that I can tell, that American Spectator piece didn't engender anybody to get banned on Facebook. But what did result in a ban was the suggestion that, and this was based on, there's a video floating around the internet that it's this black guy, and he shows up at this school because his 5-6-year-old grandson, some teacher put him in a dress. And this guy didn't like that one bit. And so he shows up.
This is something that actually happened?
Yes. Where? And so I don't know. Okay. Chicago or somewhere. Anyway, okay. I don't know. I don't know where it was. So I think by the accents, I think it's somewhere in the Midwest. Okay. So anyway, he shows up and he's got his phone and he's talking to this woman who's the teacher. And he's like, "Excuse me, you put my grandson in a dress?" And she's like, yeah, and he's like, "Okay, well, no, like that, she's like, "Well, you need to talk to the principal." He's like, no, I'm going to talk to you. Right. So this whole thing plays out. And I mean, he's very unhappy. He's not mean, nasty, violent, whatever. But so anyway, I'm on Facebook and I share this and I'm like, so like these faculty and administrators that they think it's a cool idea to like trans a 5-year-old. All right. Tell you what, we ought to pass a law saying that before you do that, you have to go through the process yourself. Right? You got to go through the hormones, and you're gonna have to go, like, you're a woman, you're gonna get top surgery, and you're gonna get those things done so that you can experience what it is that you're leading these kids into, right? Where there's an 80% suicidal ideation rate and a 40% suicide attempt rate and a 100% medical problems for the rest of your life rate. Yeah. All right. Before you to take defenseless 5, 6, 7-year-old kids and drag them through that, okay, or start them on the road to it, you need to do it yourself. So you post that on Facebook, you get banned for 3 days. Why? Because you're inciting violence. It's inciting violence to suggest that the adults who are leading these people into, that Pandora's box taste some of it themselves. And I mean, the level of cognitive dissonance and irony in that is just mind-blowing, but that's where we are with these social media apps. And again, they want you to fight for your country, and they want you to pay more taxes than you're paying now, and they want you to give up your freedom of speech. They want you to give up your Second Amendment rights, right? I mean, like, this is what they're asking of you. And what are they given? We're going to trans your kid, and if you complain about it on Facebook, we're going to say you're violent.
Right.
No, guys.
There are some rays of hope. There are rays of hope. Okay, so we've painted a very bleak dystopian picture, basically because we're in Biden's world and we're living his, he's a warmonger, evidently. You remember when that was thrown around about Bush?
Let's say went from being for the nuclear freeze back in 1984.
Right.
To being like, hey, let's get, pour American troops into the meat grinder as soon as I can make, my own party go for it.
Right. Well, so I don't know if you've seen or not, but South Park had an episode based on Prince Harry and Meghan Markle. Did you see it?
Just watched the clips of it.
I watched the whole thing.
The worldwide privacy tour.
It was so good.
It's hilarious.
And it wasn't even like, as some hardcore, which I'm not, so, take this for what it's worth, but hardcore South Park people were like, they went easy on them. But even still, and with their baby sensibilities,
South Park easy is not easy.
Yeah, no, it's not easy. And it was so funny. And where at the end, which is, I don't know if you saw in one of the clips, but they were deciding whether or not they were going to give this, kind of thing up or not. And at the end, they open. First off, can we just say that the way they portray Canadians is just the best. They're not even human. I love that the butt of every joke is that the Canadians, are kind of like puppets and kind of unthinking puppets.
Right.
So anyway, so they open up, her head and like yell into it, and it's the void. There's nothing in there. And, her husband is like offended for her, and oh my goodness. And that the title of his book is Wah. Wah. It was so good. And I think I would like to thank Trey Parker and his partner, basically.
I can't remember what Matt's last name is.
Yeah.
Matt is something.
But they speak for all Americans in one. Like, just shut up, go away. And evidently, they're just really they're distraught about it.
Yeah, she's distraught, and she's now in counseling because it's like,
they're debating legal action, and I hope.
What are you going to do? You're gonna sue South Park? I mean, I'm not sure that South Park's publicists aren't like ginning that up. You could sue us if you really.
I hope they do. I mean, that would just be the best.
There'll be a countersuit. I don't even know what the countersuit will be. The countersuit will win. It's hilariously funny. Honestly, if we had free speech at the level that we used to have, like in the 80s or the 90s, this would be an incredibly awesome time for satire and comedy humor, because there is so much to make fun of. Right. I can't even imagine what comedians from like Richard Belzer just died. What Richard Belzer doing a stand-up act on John Fetterman, what that would look like. because that would bring the house down no matter where. I mean, it would be the funniest thing that you ever saw. Is, you know, some of these kind of old time shock comedians that get a hold of John Fetterman and just rip that whole thing apart, because it's, yeah, okay, it's sad the guy's got medical problems, but that's not the issue.
No,
Okay,
what's sad is he's
for
got
office.
I mean, that's not sad. Yeah, you know, lots of people have medical issues. What's sad is the people around him who
That's right.
exploited this guy. And what's sad are the voters in Pennsylvania that they would vote
They
for
would put up with.
like an empty sack of potatoes for
That's right.
to be the
That's
representative.
right.
I mean, it's just
You know,
insane.
but see, that's the thing, the whole kind of woke sensibility. Oh, you can't say it. It's like, no, no, no. Back when I grew up, right? Like when I was growing up, where it was freewheeling and you could take shots at anybody for anything. You want to run for the Senate, right? And you're like, in other words, you're going to have that kind of power and privilege, and you're a meat sack, right? Like you're non-compost menace. They would rip you six ways to Sunday, and everybody would laugh because they would know that, hey, you brought this on yourself running for the US Senate, right? And that wife, the Brazilian who came here as an illegal and is now like this close to being an actual US Senator, and probably is a de facto US Senator as it is now, okay?
Right.
I mean, they would hammer her. I had the piece at the American Spectator this morning. She's Senora Macbeth is what she is, because that's basically what's going on here. And it's, oh, you can't say that because look at her and she's doing the best she can to hold her family together. And it's like, what?
Right.
What?
Mm-hmm.
No, hold her family together would be like, honey, you just had a stroke that almost killed you, and you're going to be years recovering from it. You're not running for the Senate. We're going home and we're going to freaking like try and make the best of the life that we have, right?
Right.
You're the lieutenant governor of the state of Pennsylvania. You got a pension that's going to kick in, and that's it. I mean, like this guy, he had money already. They're not hurting for money. He could go back to Braddock, Pennsylvania, and live the rest of his life, and that's, which is what is expected of decent people. Okay, you can't hold down that job. You're done, right? Give somebody else a chance. Instead, it's, oh no, because we have to have that power and privilege. And if you mention this, it makes you the bad person. And it's like, wow, okay, all right. This is the slippery slope that leads you in a real bad situation when you can't make fun of people who are desperately in need of being made fun of. And the Fettermans are, and the Bidens are, Zelensky is,
the list is really endless.
Harry and Meghan are.
Yeah,
I mean,
it's just
practically every one of these privileged elite idiots out there deserves to be skewered. And it's like, you're not allowed to do it. It's like, I don't think so. I think that we probably need to get nastier and funnier and never stop.
Well, I said something earlier this week in the staff meeting, and then we should probably wrap up here. But we're talking about the lack of free speech and what's happening on, Facebook and Twitter and all of these different venues where speech is now like either not allowed to even be said, books aren't allowed to be written, or books like Roald Dahl's book is just books are like,
now we're going to censor them. Now we're going to change them.
We're going to change them. And so I worry. I don't think the younger generation, we feel like there's been a loss because there's been a loss, but I'm not sure that the younger generation really feels that loss because they really haven't had it.
Right.
And so it's just a shame. Anyway, so all of that to say, for those of you who are listening, that when you can't find our certain topics on Twitter, when you wonder where'd they go on Twitter or what happened on Facebook, if you're not seeing us, it is because if you're not finding us in search, if you're wondering, well, don't they make advertising dollars? No, what's happening more and more is free speech is being, the incentives are for everyone to shut up, because if you don't, you are penalized financially. We said this before. I'm saying this again because it blew up this last week and has continued into this week. And it's going to be an ongoing thing for us at the American Spectator, because we've refused to bend the knee and not say the truth. We are going to still continue to write what we believe and say the truth, and it's going, and we'll be punished for it. We've been punished for it. We're going to continue to be punished for it. And so that's why we rely on you. We rely on you subscribing to us. We rely on your likes and your subscriptions. But even still, there's a good chance you might not be notified by Google or by YouTube when we have a new video out. You might not, even if you have to actively find us, because that's the world that we live in now. And I thank you for doing it. For those of you who are listening, who are sharing our content, thank you. And like us, subscribe, and share, because that's the way we can get it out there. You have to come to us, and we appreciate you doing it. I don't know if Scott, if you have anything more to say about it.
No, that's, I mean, we said it last week. Events have proven us correct, and then some.
Yeah.
Guys, we really need your help to get this content out, and everything else that's, I've got the Hayride and Reviver, and we depend on social media shares to push traffic for that. We've got email lists on both. The Spectator's got one, obviously. Dan Flynn's got a fantastic email newsletter that comes out every morning. Join up all that stuff, right? Subscribe to this, share it to your friends. We've got to build our own community to get the word out, because big tech is basically under orders by an administration hostile to free speech. To suppress everything that administration doesn't like, which includes us, and probably for good reason, because as we've just talked about all the terrible things that they're up to, none of which is false. But like they've already, the American Spectator was on a list by some British nonprofit of 39
paid for by the State Department.
Paid for by the State Department. That of 39 conservative websites that that they don't. Real Clear Politics was on that list, which is unbelievable. And they'll sit there and tell you, yeah, well, the good list is NPR and BuzzFeed and Huffington Post. Literally, that was on the good list of this operation out of Great Britain that was basically had the power to suppress digital ad network monetization. So. That's the world we live in, and you have to be an active consumer of content if you want to. So you have to support the truth, not just ingest it the way things are. And I don't think this is a forever problem, but it's a current problem, and we're going to have to take active steps in order to make it go away, and that involves you guys. So.
Well, thank you for listening, everybody. We'll see you next week on The Spectacle. Like, subscribe, and thank you for listening. And maybe we need to do another positive podcast again.
We're due for one.
So yeah, let's look for that next week. Let's pray some positive things happen between now and then. Anyway, thank you all for listening. We'll talk to you next week.
Happy Mardi Gras, everybody.